Please welcome to the stage, Jack D. and the Frets.
Like you, be strong to hold the powers of the sun.
I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.
Listen to Pavarotti.
Can I be your superhero?
Hello, welcome to The Revealing. I'm your host, Pavarotti, and I'm here to discuss the Idaho 4 case. And, I want to try to clarify exactly what my mission is here as it relates to this case, because it's really twofold. Number one, I want the actual perpetrators in this case, every one of them that was involved, exposed and held accountable for whatever role that they played. And also I want complete transparency with the public about everything that went on in this case and who all's involved and all the hidden stuff brought to light. But on the other hand, my second objective is to try to do whatever part that I can do in stopping somebody that has one piece of evidence against them. Because now that all the police reports that have been released, the court documents that were sealed, that have been unsealed, have all been released and unsealed. And if you've taken the time to go through and read each and every one of them, and then you hear interviews with the detectives in the case, the prosecutors in the case, and everything that we thought they had as far as evidence against Bryan Kohberger turns out didn't even exist. Most of it was just lies in general. And then when we're looking at the real evidence in the actual case files, in the police reports, and we find out that there's one piece of evidence against Bryan Kohberger, and that's touch DNA on a knife sheath. Transferable touch DNA on a knife sheath. And there is really no other evidence at all. They see a blurry image of a white car. They have times where they don't know where he's at because his phone's not reporting to a network. I mean, there's really no evidence against Bryan Kohberger other than that one little piece. Now, convicting somebody, putting him in prison for the rest of his life based on that one piece of evidence is something that I find to be a terrible, terrible thing. I mean, that is the definition of injustice, in my opinion. If there was anything to corroborate it, then I would keep my eyes open at it. I'm not saying it's impossible for Kohberger to not have been, a possible contributor to this crime. Anything's possible. Anybody in that entire area could have been a possible contributor to the crime. My point is the only piece of evidence that ties him to any involvement in the crime is the fact that his DNA somehow supposedly ended up in a touch form on a knife sheath. And if that was the only evidence in the case, that would be one thing. It still wouldn't be enough to say, okay, we got our guy. But the fact that there's so much more evidence in this case that does not lead to Bryan Kohberger makes it even more egregious. And the shadiness of everybody involved in this case as well makes it even more egregious, as we're going to further discover in this video that I've put together for you. And let me just say this. How can anybody that has actually taken a closer look at things in this case come to the conclusion that there's any possible justification for Kohberger sitting in a prison cell right now? How they can do it, I have no idea. I mean, so far, the biggest piece of evidence that has come out since the plea deal has been selfie photographs that Kohberger took of himself when he was alone. Selfie photographs of him making weird faces and trying to show off his muscles to, himself, I guess. Wow, look at this. This is it. We got him. Look, wow, look at this photograph. He's making a frowny face. And then there's my favorite. There's a little bitty tiny nick on his knuckle. I mean, just a little bitty tiny nick. Now, Kohberger, Super Ninja, right? He didn't look like Super Ninja when he took his shirt off. He looked like, he was pretty frail in my opinion. But Super Ninja went into a house inside of 8 minutes, delivered more than 100 and something blows with a knife and something else. And all he got on him was a little tiny little nick on his ring finger. And you're going to look at that and go, man, look, we got to look at it, from an evidence perspective. I mean, that could be something significant. Give me a break, man. Give me a break. The person that received injuries in this case apparently bled everywhere. His blood was all over the place. And you can bet that's what the cleanup was for. Whoever cleaned it up was cleaning up his blood. And they just didn't clean it all up, I guess. I mean, I don't know what the cleanup, I have no idea. I do know the perpetrator, though, was injured, and it certainly wasn't a little nick on his ring finger that got that blood everywhere. So that's the best they can come up with in light of everything else that we know and we are about to discover as we go through this unclassified FBI report, lab report on analysis. And it is just mind-boggling to me. Prepare to have your mind boggled, same as me. Let's roll. So I think it's important to know the context around this particular evidence that we're going to be talking about and the dates in which this particular evidence was coming into play. Now, we know that the plea deal was put together on, what day was it? I think it was 7/2? July 2nd. Now, in my opinion, they actually put the deal together behind closed doors on June 26th when a lot of other things went down. But this is coming up a little less than a month before the plea deal. And the defense files a motion on June 6th to admit evidence at trial. And it's not only a motion to admit evidence at trial filed by the defense, but it's a stipulated motion, which means the prosecution stipulated to the evidence being admitted as evidence at trial. So usually when the prosecution stipulates to the defense that something can be admitted at trial, then it's usually admitted at trial. And considering the context around this evidence we'll be talking about, you wouldn't even think you would need a stipulation to get it admitted. It's an FBI lab report on actual evidence in the case. But then on June the 9th, Judge Hippler orders granting the admission of this evidence at trial. So no big deal. Everything's working like it should. But then that same day, the judge amends his order and he conditionally denies the admission of the evidence until what's called foundation is laid with witness testimony. So instead of just granting the admission of the evidence at trial, because it's an FBI laboratory report of the evidence, the judge, for some reason, decided to conditionally deny the evidence unless it's first brought through witness testimony. Let me show you. Okay, so first off, this is June 6th. This is the stipulated motion to the admission of additional exhibits as evidence at trial. And Kohberger, through his defense, and the stipulation by the prosecution, wants the admission of 2 additional exhibits described for the record as Exhibit D1062, and it's an FBI lab report number 4, and D1063, FBI lab report number 12. And it's dated this 5th day of June, 2025. And you can see it's signed by Ann Taylor for the defense team and by Ashley Jennings, the deputy prosecutor. So they're saying, okay, yeah, we're stipulating that Ann Taylor and defense can put these exhibits in at trial. No big deal. And then we don't get to see, for some reason, the original order by the judge, but actually I guess we do if you just don't read this additional writing where he changed his order. The judge initially said, order granting admission of additional exhibits as evidence at trial. And it says, the court having before it the stipulated motion to the admission of additional exhibits as evidence at trial and good cause appearing now, therefore it is hereby ordered. The defense shall be allowed to admit the additional exhibits as evidence at trial. The exhibits are the FBI Lab Report 4 and FBI Lab Report 12. And it's so ordered, and then he must have come right back after he did that, and I remember when this happened, and he changed it. And he changed it, and you can see how he changed it, to an order conditionally denying admission of additional exhibits as evidence at trial. Denied. Evidence will not be admitted until offered with the appropriate witness at trial, as was explained at the pretrial conference. So that means that the defense would not be able to refer to the evidence in these lab reports during the course of the trial until they actually put the witness, which I guess would be the FBI person who's in charge of this lab report, on the stand and questioning him about or her about the lab report. So that would definitely affect the way somebody would go about actually, conducting their trial. I mean, that would go into the planning of how they planned on actually going through this trial. Now they can't do it until they put the witness on the stand to even refer to this stuff. And the fact that he changed it, and it's just a FBI lab report that should be able to be looked at just by itself as evidence. And the fact that he changed it to this, I think he knew that this would disrupt the entire plan of the defense during the trial. But let's take a closer look at what it is that Judge Hippler changed his order on and denied it being admitted into evidence until witnesses were put on the stand and proper foundation was laid. Because it's very interesting to me. I think you'll find it interesting as well. Okay, so here is what they've unsealed for us. And again, this was on June the 6th. And this is the original stipulated motion to the admission of the exhibits as evidence at trial. And in this one, they've actually attached the exhibit to which Ashley Jennings stipulated Ann Taylor to admitting as evidence at trial. And the exhibit is a unclassified FBI laboratory report. And this report was completed on January 27, 2023. So communications January 4th, 2023. And what did this report consist of? I think once they got this report done on January 27th, this should have been the date that they released Kohberger from his hold at the Latah County Jail. But instead, they just doubled down and planned on superseding the preliminary hearing with a bogus grand jury indictment, because I'm sure once this made its way into the preliminary hearing, then there would never have been a actual indictment against Bryan Kohberger. They would have dropped the charges and then moved on. But what does this report consist of? Victims: Ethan, Maddie, Xana, and Kaylee. And these are trace evidence of hairs and fibers. And this document may contain privileged or personally identifiable information, yada, yada. FBI laboratory evidence designators. So what do they have in this lab report? Well, they have head hair samples from Ethan, head hair samples from Kaylee and from Xana and from Maddie. And when it says head hair samples, it doesn't mean they've taken and found other people's hair in their head. This is actual samples they've taken of the victim's hair so that they can compare it to samples from Kohberger's residence, vehicle, and his parents' residence. But then they also took samples of evidence from necklaces and bracelets that Ethan wore, earrings from Kaylee, fake eyelashes from Maddie, rings from Maddie, a hair tie from Maddie, and a comforter. It doesn't say where the comforter came from, but a comforter at King Road. And then it gets to the things that they took from Bryan's apartment, basically. Oh, no. This is still stuff from King Road. All right. Debris from northwest bedroom on second floor. Doesn't really tell us what debris they're talking about, but something on the northwest bedroom on the second floor. Debris from the northwest bedroom on the second floor. So 2 of those. Debris from half wall leading to northwest bedroom on second floor. Debris from door on northwest bedroom on second floor. And debris from the drying cabinet. Now, whenever it talks about the drying cabinet, if y'all remember, I covered in the MPD docs where they were taking the evidence to the FBI's office, or maybe it was the ISP lab, and they had to take some of the evidence because it was still wet and they had to put it in dryers overnight. So whenever it's talking about a drying cabinet, it's talking about the drying cabinets at the Idaho State Police lab. And they put all the evidence in there and dried it, and then they collected like in a dryer has the little bin that collects all the fuzz. Well, they dried everything, and then they collected the bin with the fuzz to test as evidence. Anyway, then we go to Kohberger's apartment, and this is what they were comparing the other things to. They got debris from under a computer pad on the desk at his apartment. Debris from under a computer pad on the desk at his apartment. So I guess 2 samples for the debris under the computer pad. Debris from a pillow in the bedroom, debris from the east wall of shower in the bedroom, and debris from broom head. Then they go through and they look at Ethan's socks, a bag from Ethan, a shirt from Kaylee, sock from Kaylee, handbag from Kaylee, underwear from Xana, handbags, shirts, handbags. Then they've got a dog hair sample from Murphy. And then they got a head hair sample from Bryan himself. And they have an arm hair sample from Bryan. And we'll explain why they have a head hair and an arm hair in this report. The head hair actually, we'll explain it here in just a minute. It's actually important. A blanket from King Road, original packaging from item 20 comforter. So they took the packaging that the comforter was in, and then they tested the packaging, I guess thinking that maybe evidence might have fallen off of it. Then once again, filter from dryer, catch paper from dryer, security tag from dryer. These are all dryers at the lab. Right hand bag from Ethan, pants from Kaylee, right hand bag from Kaylee, sweatshirt from Xana, pants from Maddie. And the reason they're doing all of their pants and sweatshirts and things like that is for fibers. So they've got a bunch of fibers from all the victims because they're going to compare that to things that were found in Bryan Kohberger's apartment to see if it matches. Again, more of the stuff from the drying cabinet at the lab, and then Kohberger's vacuum cleaner from his apartment. And the results of the trace evidence examinations, hair and fiber, are included in this report. Methods. Microscopic examination of hairs is accomplished by using stereomicroscopy and comparison microscopy. The presence or absence, appearance, arrangement, and distribution of the characteristics within the cuticle, cortex, and medulla of the hairs are examined and may be compared during a hair examination. So they got all of this stuff from the victims, from Bryan Kohberger. Now it's time for them to match that evidence up to their perpetrator. How did that turn out for them? Results of examination. The items submitted from Ethan Chapin, items 3, 12, 13, 31 through 33, and 52. And I actually went through and classified everything so that I knew what I was looking at in this report. I won't bore you with it. And it goes through and it mentions everything. And then it says all of these items were examined for hairs, microscopically consistent with hairs in the head hair sample from Bryan Christopher Kohberger. So all those hairs from all that stuff in the victim's home and from the victims themselves were compared to a hair sample from Bryan Kohberger, and none were found. So there was nothing that was microscopically consistent with Bryan Kohberger's hair. Now, here's where I say this. If all of this evidence that y'all collected was not consistent with Bryan Kohberger, then who was it consistent with? That means that you've got at least a different person other than Bryan Kohberger who all of that stuff would likely belong to. So what are we doing here? Items submitted from Bryan Kohberger's apartment were examined for hairs microscopically consistent with the hairs in the head hair and samples from Ethan, Kaylee, Xana, and Maddie. However, none were found. So not only was all the evidence that they found at the house, they were unable to match any of it to Kohberger, which means it belonged to somebody other than Bryan Kohberger. But in reverse, they took all of that stuff and took stuff from Kohberger's apartment, and it didn't match him there either. So they've actually looked at things both ways. Stuff from their house compared to Kohberger, stuff from Kohberger's house compared to them. Neither one's a match. Animal hairs consistent with dog hairs found on item 61 are microscopically dissimilar to hairs in the dog hair sample from Murphy. So item number 61 was a dog hair found in Bryan Kohberger's apartment. They compare it to Murphy and it's microscopically dissimilar, which means it doesn't match. Accordingly, Murphy cannot be included as a possible source of these hairs. So, no, nothing compared to Murphy matched either. An animal hair consistent with cat hair found in item 26 is of limited value for meaningful microscopic comparison purposes and has been preserved for possible future comparisons. And let's see, item number 26 is debris found from under the computer pad. So under Kohberger's computer pad, he had a cat hair. And since the people in the King Road residence didn't have a cat, then that was of no evidentiary value. They're going to save that evidence for later in case they try to, jam him on a different crime where a lady had a cat, I guess. The additional debris collected from items 3, 12, 13, 15 through 20, 30 through 43, 47 through 61 has been preserved for possible future comparisons. Why do you think they did that? They've already compared all of that stuff to Bryan Kohberger and it didn't match. So they're preserving it for future comparisons because the FBI was looking to compare it in the future to somebody other than Bryan Kohberger. Yeah, they didn't want this evidence coming in unless there was proper foundation laid by a witness to bring it in. This is a freaking FBI lab report. Interpretation. Now, this is where I think it gets really interesting, and it kind of goes with the point that I've made before. Hairs may be characterized and classified according to their morphology. The first step is determining whether the hair is of human or animal, non-human origin. So first thing they got to figure out, is it a human hair or is it Murphy's hair? Animal hairs may be further classified as the type of hair, fur, guard, and the type of animal, dog, cat, which we know they've done that in this respect. They had a dog hair and they found a cat hair. But when it gets to the human hairs, they look for something different. Human hairs may be further examined for characteristics of ancestry and somatic origin, the body area. So head hairs are for ancestry and the body hairs are for somatic origin. Human hairs can exhibit characteristics of European ancestry, previously known as Caucasian, African ancestry, previously known as Negroid, and then it says, or Asian Native American ancestry, previously Mongoloid. What is missing out of this that I find is interesting is it doesn't say anything about Hispanic origin. And that's very interesting to me considering what we read in a different lab report. But human hairs may also exhibit characteristics of more than one ancestral group. Ancestral group classifications are based on the macroscopic and microscopic characteristics, which are typically observed in hairs from individuals of different ancestral groups. It should be noted there is a potential for a hair to be classified into an ancestral group, which may not correspond with an individual's outward physical appearance and or how an individual identifies their own race or ethnic group. And then it gets into somatic origin classifications. But I think it is very interesting that they leave out the Hispanic in this, because y'all remember me going over this lab report where they were trying to include or exclude Bryan Kohberger from the DNA under Maddie's fingernails, and it turned out he was excluded from it. And the match between item 13.1, which it says the body sample from Madison Mogan, but we know 13.1 it was what was under her fingernails. And it's 5,000 times less probable than a coincidental match to an unrelated African-American person, 68,000 times less probable than a coincidental match to an unrelated Caucasian person, 101,000 times less probable than a coincidental match to an unrelated Hispanic person. Now, see, in the FBI report, it doesn't even mention anything about Hispanic people. It only says Caucasian, African American, and either Asian or Native American. So it's kind of weird how they skip over the Asian Native American that's apparently a large population group in this report. But then in the other report, they exclude the Hispanic. So it's kind of weird to me. Let me look at this. So it turns out in hair samples, just their head hair, Spanish people are genetically part of the broader European population. Because of this, their hair generally shares the same physical traits as other Europeans, making it indistinguishable through microscopic examination. And when we talk about what they look for as far as the hair in comparisons, it's going to tell us here in a minute, but you'll see it's very distinct when you look at different samples of head hair from individuals. Anybody of European ancestry, their hair is going to look like this under a microscope, and that includes Spanish people. Anybody of African American descent is going to have a hair that looks like this under a microscope. And then anybody that is Asian or Native American, they're both classified as Asian, their hair will look like this under a microscope. And I think that's going to be important. Then it's going to get into the pubic hair. But with these three classifications of hair, whenever they're doing a comparison, this is what they're trying to determine first. Is it European, is it African, or is it Asian when they compare it to the potential perpetrator's hair? Watch this. As we go through this, once again, interpretation. Hairs may be characterized and classified according to their morphology. So human hairs are examined for characteristics of ancestry and somatic origin. And somatic origin, again, is the body area. But hairs can exhibit characteristics of European, previously Caucasian, African, or Asian Native American ancestry. So what they're doing is they're taking the hairs that are of the unknown individual, and as they do the comparison to hairs found at Bryan Kohberger's house, that's what they look for. Bryan Kohberger's hair was obviously of Caucasian European ancestry descent. So for them to not be able to compare his hair to the other hairs, that means that these other hairs were not Caucasian or of European ancestry. That means that they were either Asian Native American or African ancestry. Well, I think we can eliminate African ancestry as well, because when we look at the lab report on the other evidence, it says it's 5,000 times less probable that a coincidental match to an unrelated African American is the results of the sample of the DNA under Maddie's fingernails. And it's not Caucasian and they're not Hispanic, because they do Hispanic in this matchup. And it's 101,000 times less probable that they're Hispanic. So not only does the DNA under Maddie's fingernails exclude African American, Caucasian, and a Hispanic person, but now we've got an FBI report where they're excluding, based on the hair samples, European ancestry, which leaves African American or Asian. Based on the other sample, we can eliminate African American, and we got a Native American hair that they're comparing all of the victims' evidence to, and it doesn't match Bryan Kohberger. And they're typically observed in hairs from individuals of different ancestral groups. It should be noted, there is the potential for a hair to be classified into an ancestral group which may not correspond with an individual's outward physical appearance and or how an individual identifies their own race or ethnic group. Somatic origin classifications are based on the macroscopic and microscopic characteristics which are typically observed in hairs from different areas of the body. And what happened is they went through all of that. That is just an explanation of what they were going through when they couldn't find comparisons to any of the hairs found in the victim's residence to Bryan Kohberger. Then it goes on to talk about laboratory results, trace hairs, fibers, and again, they're doing head hairs, dog hairs from Murphy, headrest from the compartment in the Hyundai Elantra. Now they're taking the same hairs and they're trying to compare it to hairs found in Bryan Kohberger's car. Vacuum sweepings from the floor compartment in the Elantra. Vacuum sweepings from the seat compartment. Vacuum sweepings from compartment B, compartment C, compartment D. They went through and vacuumed his entire areas of his car, much less going through and finding, DNA to match up to blood. Pants from laundry basket on his TV stand, shirts, sweatshirts, jackets. And that's all at his parents' house. So they took everything they could find in his parents' house, vacuumed his entire car, and tried to match it up to head hairs from the victims and from Murphy. How did that work out for them? Oh, of all this evidence, we compared it, and was there any matches? However, none were found. Oh, we compared Murphy, and Murphy cannot be included as a possible source of these hairs. And then it goes on to talk about how they do fiber comparisons, and that's the end of the report. So basically, this entire report is they couldn't match anything to Bryan Kohberger, but I think the key is actually what it says up here as it relates to how they do these hair comparisons. They literally identify the ancestry of the hair and then compare it based on the ancestry of the hair that they're comparing it to. And it was two different ethnic groups, or else they would have to say it cannot be excluded. Let's read the DOJ guidelines on that. So the DOJ guidelines, which the FBI supposedly follows for hair examinations or hair comparisons, is very clear. Principles of forensic hair examination. They conduct the comparisons microscopically to determine somatic origin, which that's body hair, and characteristics of ancestry. And then it gets into whether it's an animal or how good the hair condition is in. And there's only three possible determinations, either inclusion, exclusion, or inconclusive. So we know that in the FBI report, they excluded Bryan Kohberger from being a contributor to those hairs. The only way they could exclude him is if his characteristics of ancestry differed from that of the hair they were comparing his to. If he had the same ancestry, then they would have had to, at the very least, say inconclusive, if not inclusion. And that's the same with his head hair or his hair from his somatic region, because they simply do the same thing. It just has different properties. Somatic origin, body area classifications are based on the macroscopic and microscopic characteristics that are typically observed in hairs from different areas of the body. A human hair may be classified according to its region of the body using features such as root appearance, diameter variation, texture, and medulla. Ancestral group classifications are based on characteristics that are typically observed in hairs from individuals of different ancestral groups and may or may not correspond with how an individual identifies his or her race. Characteristics of ancestry often can be determined using features such as pigment distribution and cross-sectional shape, like we see in these comparisons. And once again, if you're of European ancestry, it's going to look like this. African, it's going to look like this. Asian or Native American, it's going to look like this. And then they'll do comparisons from there if you match that ethnic group. But then when you get to the somatic region, which is another way to say pubic hair, you'll see there's going to be differences in European. This one just says pubic hair area. It doesn't say what race it is. Determination of racial origin: European, Caucasian, African ancestry, Negroid, Asian ancestry, Mongoloid. And then it'll go even further into what you look at to determine the difference. European, African is quite different. And of Asian, Native American ancestry is quite different. And here they are, all three compared together. You can see they're quite different. Damage, disease, and treatment. So there's, depending on how good shape the sample is in. And anyway, it's interesting when you look at what they compare. The main thing they compare, though, is the ancestral descent. So here's Kohberger. Here's likely the hair they were comparing everything to in the apartment, in the King Road residence. So now it brings me back to this. Unless you're paying close attention to this case, most people out there don't even know what I'm about to talk about. And that is the fact that not only did I just read you a FBI lab report where absolutely nothing matched Kohberger, but likely the hairs that they were trying to compare to Kohberger weren't even of the same racial descent or ancestral descent. So when you get into the other evidence in the case that we now know exists, like we got the button snap DNA skin cell that's easily transferable. Wow, that one matched Kohberger, lab report number 4. But nothing else did. The mixture of blood on the back of the knife sheath that was mixed with the victim's blood is still an unknown contributor. Lab report number 4. Swab in Xana's bedroom, unknown contributor. Lab report number 7. The DNA under Maddie's fingernails, unknown contributor. Bryan Kohberger excluded. Lab report number 4. DNA from all the other victims' fingernails. DNA profile made from the upper floor banister, above the stairwell, and the bottom of the handrail are both from an unknown contributor. Lab report number 13. DNA profiles made from samples above the stairwell and the half wall, unknown contributor. Lab report number 26. And a DNA sample made from a swab of Mogan's bedroom door is from an unknown contributor. Lab report number 31. And just in case you question where I'm getting this from, DNA mixture was found on the back of the sheath. States Exhibit S1, ISP Forensic DNA Lab Report 4. DNA from the swab taken in Xana Kernodle's bedroom and from the DNA found under Miss Mogan's fingernails. Lab report 7. Lab report 13 is DNA from the samples from the fingernails of all other victims, as well as swabs taken above the stairwell at the residence, the upper floor banister, and the bottom of the handrail. See lab report 13. Lab report 26 is a DNA sample taken on the north wall of the stairwell at the residence and another sample taken from the half wall at the residence. Lab report 31 is DNA sample taken from the door of Miss Mogan's bedroom. So if you question where to find all of these DNA profiles that they made from evidence at the crime scene that couldn't be compared to Bryan Kohberger, just come to this report right here and it'll tell you what lab report they're all in. Which brings me to my last point, because as much as taking things at face value as you can tells you that for instance, Ann Taylor and the defense team are no longer even part of the Bryan Kohberger case. And everything tells us that at face value. But everything else that we look at in this case as it relates to what they did all the way up to the point of the plea deal, along with all the new information that's coming out day after day of what was actually going on in the court proceedings after reading all the police reports, everything that I take not at face value tells me that there is no way that this thing is finished. And there's no way that this defense team was finished with it. Everything tells me that it's got to be some kind of a strategy by the defense team to take this to trial at some point and actually try this case. I don't know what their strategy is, or if there was one, or if there is one, but everything I look at tells me there's got to be. And I watched a video by Jules last night. She did a very good video, and I wouldn't have even thought of it at this point, to go through the new sealed doc filing. And you would think that the defense, like they did in the last sealed docs, wouldn't have objected to much being unsealed, because they didn't. Well, now I know why they didn't after reading all the things that were unsealed. But for some reason, the defense has a little bit different perspective on the next things that are going to be unsealed, and the codes that they cite for keeping those things sealed are very, very interesting. And Jules pointed this out, and I just want to say that I thought that was a very, very good interpretation of the facts, Jules. And I will reiterate what she had already covered. And this one just posted along with the order that posted soon after, and I think it is interesting because the court having before it the motion to seal defendant's supplemental response to the court's order regarding sealed documents and good cause appearing now, it is hereby ordered. Defendant's supplemental response to the court's order regarding sealed documents shall be filed under seal pursuant to Idaho Criminal Rules of Administration 32I and Idaho Code 74-124-1 B and C and the court's order. So I think it's very interesting that not only has the defense replied with an order requesting the documents be remain sealed due to these particular codes, but I think it's also telling that the judge ordered them to remain sealed due to those particular codes. So the defense could possibly have a strategy, and the judge could possibly know what it is because he ordered it based on those codes. And what do those codes tell us? ICAR 32I is the Idaho Court Administrative Rule 32. All right, 32I, redaction and sealing of court records. And it goes through and it talks about them. And if the motion seeks to redact or seal previously filed records, the court at its discretion may temporarily seal them. An order to redact or seal records may be challenged. Orders to redact or seal. Why would you do this? They contain highly intimate facts. They contain facts or statements that may be libelous. Facts or statements that compromise a person's financial security, compromise the security of the judicial branch, endanger a person's life, preserve that it is necessary to temporarily seal or redact the records to preserve the right to a fair trial. Is this what they were pointing to in this code? Well, I mean, it's quite possible considering what Idaho code they pointed to says. See, Idaho code 74-124 talks about transparent and ethical government. And they said 74-124-1 B and C, not just B and not just C, but B and C. So B is deprive a person of a right to a fair trial or an impartial adjudication. Well, how are you going to deprive Kohberger to the right of a fair trial or impartial adjudication when he pled guilty and there already has been adjudication? Unless there was something else going on we didn't know about, or constitute an unwarranted invasion of personal privacy. So they list both of those. So that tells me that because deprive a person of a right to a fair trial or impartial adjudication is under Rule 32I in the other code they cited. I think that's exactly why the defense continues to want these documents to be sealed and why the judge ordered them to remain sealed. It's getting interesting, folks.
Until I walk awake, scream my mind, I shout, the ground shakes. How much can I take? My mind will break. Will it break? Can I take? Can I be your superhero?